Everyone's done. Kirsty, it's all for you.
Thank you so much. I'm really sad that I'm not in Paris hanging out and getting to sort of chat with all of you over delicious food and interesting conversations, but I am really, really excited to tell you about this citizen science project, and also I hope to save a good amount of time at the end for some discussions, some conversations. I'm very curious to know your thoughts and obviously any questions that you have. I'm just going to click in the chat a link to my slides so that you have them. There's also some useful links there. And then let me share my screen. Here I go. And hopefully you can see my title slide. Bastien, can you just unmute and tell me that you can see it?
Yep,
okay?
It works.
Great, fab. So my name's Kirsty. Actually, this is my very first day of a new role at the Turing Institute. I am now leading, one second, I just lost my window. I am now leading a research program on tools, practices, and systems. It's a bit of an obvious name because we build tools, practices, and systems, but it thinks about the fundamental infrastructure and how we do data science research and how we can bring people together to answer the most important questions. And this project that I work on, I think, is really sort of digging into the fundamentals of how we do that work and sort of why we do that work in the ways that we do. So my pronouns are she and her. And like I said, if folks can keep questions at the end, I hope that we'll have lots of time to cover those. Usually, I fit too much into my talks and I get very nervous that I end up leaving the acknowledgement slide right to the very end and it gets sort of cut off and thrown away. And so I really like to start my talks by thanking the project team. I am a sort of shepherd of this project and I have some great ideas, but all of the folks on this slide are the people who actually make them happen. So thank you so, so much to the folks at Autistica, both for funding us, but also for sort of inspiring the question. Members of the Discover cohort and the Insight group, which are members of the autistic community who stay in touch with Autistica to help drive their research forwards in a meaningful way. Obviously, my colleagues at the Alan Turing Institute, our collaborators at Open Humans, and the team at Fujitsu, who are giving pro bono support to build the front end of the website. And this is me. This is a picture that's a few years old. It's me using Docker on a Windows laptop for the first time. And so I am like wildly excited about that, which is why I'm so happy. My background is that my PhD was in brain imaging. I'm interested in how children and adolescents' brains change through the years and how that might relate to mental health disorders. And my postdoc was at the University of Cambridge, and I worked on a very similar type of project. And then since coming to the Alan Turing Institute, which is the UK's National Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence, I've started thinking a little bit more about the best place to put my focus. And I think that one of the things that I've become really, really excited about is digging into ways of working that scale much better than sort of individual groups answering research questions together. So a lot of that's going to come up over the course of the talk, but that's just a little introduction to who I am. And how people work together might be a dimension of openness, but open scholarship, open science is a little bit of a difficult term from the point of view that it means so many things, that it means so many things to different people, that it's often hard to know exactly what people are talking about when they think about it. And so I like to include in my talks this open scholarship umbrella. Note that I'm saying open scholarship, or I'll sometimes say open research instead of open science. And that's because there's lots of different types of scholarship that are not science, but should still be, in my opinion, open. It's got terms that many people at the CRI will know around open data. I don't really advocate for open data, to be honest. I advocate for fair data, so findable, accessible, interoperable and reusable data. I think open data has a lot of ethical challenges that sensitive information should not, in fact, just be downloadable from a link on the web, but they should absolutely be accessible. I'm very, very keen on open source technologies, making sure that people have the ability to interrogate an algorithm, interrogate a process, know what's going on, and also to build on top of it and reuse it. You'll know about open access, and one of the things that I want to highlight with this presentation and this project is the fact that open access doesn't just mean free to download, it means accessible, making sure that people are able to understand and participate in the project. And that's where citizen science and community science comes in. The reason that community science is on this slide rather than citizen science is because citizenship has a lot of immigration kind of baggage that comes along with it. And so community science and sort of science that is led by the people for whom it is going to affect is our sort of preferred term. I think an awful lot about open educational resources, and I run a project called the Turing Way, which is sort of heavily focused around providing those. And then I think underneath all of this is equity, diversity, and inclusion. So making sure that we are considering inclusion in the why of open scholarship at all times. And I am going to now attempt to show you a video. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and reshare another screen, and we're all just going to keep our fingers crossed that everything's going to work really smoothly. Okay, here we go.
A lot of things in the world don't make sense right now. But when you're autistic, the world has always seemed a bit, well, complicated. Don't get me wrong, there are times when we get it, or when people get us and see that our differences can be a good thing. But mostly we have to find our way in a world that wasn't built for us. The people, the chatter, the noises and smells, all the unpredictable stuff that we don't even notice, we notice all of it. Our minds are racing, trying to deal with everything hitting us all at once. The pressure builds and builds. It squeezes. It makes it hard to function. We find ways to cope, but it might be hard for you to...
Sorry, I can see that folks can't see the video. I think I'm going to just stop the video there, and I think some people could see it. All right, I'm going to keep play the last little bit. I'm sorry that it's laggy. The link is at the slides if you want to watch it properly. Let me play for the last minute of this. Thanks for everyone who's commenting in the chat. I appreciate it.
To understand. We're trying to fit in every day because we have a lot to offer in this world. We need to understand these experiences, and research is finding ways to make our world a bit easier. But you can do your bit too, because if we understand more, we can build a better world.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to go back to my slides, and I'm going to probably go and start. And here I go. Okay, so that was a video that is describing why it is difficult for autistic people to navigate a sensory environment, that there can be these really overwhelming smells and sounds and people bustling around, and it can be very, very difficult. And what I want to highlight with this slide is that the choice to focus on that research question came from a really deep, about 18-month-long collaborative endeavor with the James Lind Alliance, which is an organization that focuses on these skills, to set Autistica's research priorities with members of the autism community. So that's autistic people and also parents and carers of autistic people. And I hope I can advance to the next slide. There you go. I know you won't be able to read this, but I put this on so that you could, if you want to peruse the slides afterwards, you can see them. These are the top 10 questions in autism research that came up. Number 4, I think, is really interesting: which interventions reduce anxiety in autistic people? And number 5 is how can sensory processing in autism be better understood? And number 5 is which environments or supports are most appropriate in terms of achieving the best education, life, and social skills outcomes in autistic people. And so 90% of autistic people have sensory processing differences. And we know that from studies in lab research, where we've asked autistic people and engaged with them and done lots of different psychological tasks to demonstrate those sensory processing differences. But there's not as much work that focuses on translating that information into the real world. And the other point that I wanted to highlight before I move on to discuss more about the project is that in the UK, only 27% of research funding is spent on those community priorities. And if you look at the graph on the right-hand side, that yellow line that's shooting up from 2015 to 2016, that is really, sorry, I'm sorry, I'm reading the chat at the same time, I shouldn't have done that. That yellow line is zooming up here, and those are biological mechanisms of autism, which do not feature at all on the autistic community's priority list. So they are interesting, they're interesting research questions, but they are not featured as priorities for the autistic community. And there are decreased fundings for screening and service provision, both of which are very high priority for autistic people. So let me come back to the research question. Can citizen science tell us about how autistic people navigate the world around them? And this is a tiny little demo that Bastian built with a postdoc who worked with me, Georgia, in one day. He came to visit for a week last year at the Turing, and we had a meeting in the morning to decide what they were going to collaborate on, and it turned out that they had achieved that by Tuesday morning. And so then we had lots of other discussions and interesting collaborations to continue. But the idea is that this is a very bare bones website. This is not what the final website will look like. But an autistic person can come along, enter their experience, write an experience about what they have, about sort of navigating an environment somewhere, and also add in what they wished would have been different. They've also got options, buttons down at the bottom, saying that the information can be used for research purposes or can be viewable by others, meaning it can be public on the website, and they can actually have any combination of those. So both, neither, either or. And here are just a couple of examples. These are fake examples, but they're based on comments that we got in a scoping workshop. I found it really hard when everybody clapped at the end of all of the different lightning talks at a recent conference. They're only 3 minutes long, and it takes me a while to recover from all the sudden noises. What would you like to be different? I really like flappers, where everyone in the audience shows their support for the presentation by waving their hands rather than clapping them together. It looks like this. And it would have made my life a lot easier if we'd been encouraged to do that instead. And another one that again came from one of our scoping discussions, a London Bridge train station has been redesigned and it's super confusing to navigate now. I found it really overwhelming to get from the tube station to the platform I needed to be on. What would you like to have been different? I've been to Moorfields Eye Hospital before, and there's a green line that you can follow all the way from the tube station to Old Street to the front door of the hospital. Lines on the floor are really helpful. Paddington train station even has different colors for all the different tube lines. It's really useful. I hope those give you like a little bit of an example of what type of things are disabling for autistic people as they're navigating the real world, as they get to their jobs, as they're getting to their friends, as they're getting to hospital appointments, for example. And actions that could be taken that they do not have to do, but that would make the world much easier for them to live in. And that is the crux of the social model of disability that I'm sure most of you will have heard of. The social model of disability flips a medical model of disability on its head. It says, instead of there being something about a person who is less able, it thinks about environmental barriers, attitudinal barriers, communication barriers, and organizational barriers that stop people from being able to participate. And so one of the guiding sort of values that we have in this project is to think about a neurotypical world built by neurotypical people and what responsibilities neurotypical people have to make the world more accessible for neurodiverse members. I'm going to try for another video now. Again, the link I think is in the slide, so if it doesn't play very well, just listen to the sound or just take it easy. I think it's only a couple of minutes long, and I'll come back at the end of it. So start sharing. Start sharing.
Imagine a town full of physically impaired people, all wheelchair users. They run everything. There aren't any able-bodied people, so naturally, when they built the town, the community decided it was pointless to have ceilings 10 foot high and doors 7 foot high. So the ceilings were built at 7 foot and the doors at 5 foot. In every way, they designed the place the way they wanted it. One day, a few able-bodied people come to stay. One of the first things they notice is the height of the doors. And the reason they notice is because they keep hitting their heads. They come to stand out by the bruises they carry on their foreheads. Soon doctors, psychiatrists and social workers all become involved. Committees are formed. Many people are worried about what becomes known as the problem of the able-bodied. Throughout the town there is a growth of real concern. Specially toughened helmets are handed out, free to the able-bodied, to be worn at all times. Braces are designed which give support and relief, while keeping the able-bodied wearer bent to normal height. Various groups of compassionate wheelchair users get together and form registered charities. Every quarter they have a collection day. Upturned helmets are left in pubs and shops for people to drop their small change into. There is talk of founding special homes. But then one day, it dawns on the able-bodied that there is nothing actually wrong with them, just that society excludes them.
I think that's a really cute, I know it's a little bit old-fashioned video, but I think it's a really lovely one for explaining kind of how without any ill intent, without any sort of negative desires, it's so easy for a majority community to build a world that is inaccessible for people who are different. Can you give me this, if I can advance, pause, here I go. So our project's goals are to share autistic people's stories and adaptive techniques with others who have similar experiences. One of the things that we want to do is really build a community that helps individual autistic people feel just maybe a little bit less alone, a little bit less kind of unusual or different to how they, when they experience the world. We want to educate neurotypical people to better support their autistic friends, families, and colleagues. And just so you know, I'm neurotypical, I'm not autistic, and I'm learning an awful lot through this project. And I am taking my responsibility very seriously around calling in my neurotypical peers rather than leaving that work and burden to autistic people and their families and carers. And then we also want to advise organizations on how they can design and adapt spaces to improve autistic people's lives. And both the individual information, but also the summary information, the sort of core themes that we can extract from the project, I hope are going to be sort of able to answer all of these different goals. We have 6 values. I'm going to just take you through each of those values in this second half of the talk. So one of our project values is that we want to improve the lives of autistic people immediately and in the long term. So rather than pushing everything just to the long term, we want to be able to translate findings to be actionable for employers, policymakers, architects, and beyond. And this is just a little quote, again, from one of our scoping workshops that somebody shared with us. When anxiety is really bad, having to go to the GP is like having the general practitioner, your family doctor, is like having to climb Everest. Then I get there and ask if they've got a quiet room. Sometimes it's yes, but it's not actually a quiet room, and sometimes it's just no. And so one of the things that we think about are kind of how are there ways about navigating the built environments that could be particularly influential. So visits to the GP or hospital comes up a lot, libraries come up a lot, schools, open plan offices is a particular sort of passion because the Turing is, when we're not all remote during a global pandemic, is open plan, and it's really, really difficult to collaborate and concentrate in open plan spaces. And public transport. And one of the things that is so obvious about public transport is that if you ask people not to have to use it at rush hour, you've already made the built environment more accessible. So thinking about flexible working and sort of allowing people to travel at a time that is most convenient for them is a really nice way of becoming more accessible without actually having to change the built environment too much. We have a really good, deep focus on participatory design. So our goal is to reduce the distance between a researcher and the researched, and that I'm sure is what a lot of folks at the CRI are thinking about as well. We partner with autistic people as co-collaborators and designers, and we are spending a lot of time explaining the processes that we're following to allow everybody right now to participate clearly, but also to grow and have more people be able to participate in the future. We started this project with some scoping, and that allowed us to write up some ethics approval documentation, which I'm sure many of you have done, and it takes quite a long time. It sort of turns out when you start to really think about all of these different aspects, there's lots and lots of dimensions to think about with sharing people's information and their experiences, particularly if they're sometimes difficult. So we started with some scoping, we wrote our ethics applications, and then we ran 3 focus groups in the fall of last year. We invited participants from Autistica's Insight group. So these are people who are specifically have said to Autistica that they are willing to be contacted to be part of designing and participating in research. We ran the focus groups in person. And one of the things that I guess I'll share is that the Turing is not a very accessible environment. It's too bright. If you ever come and visit us there, the lights are really, really bright. And so one of the things that we did was actually just turn the lights off. We just said, okay, there's enough ambient light from the windows. We can still see each other. But the 3 people out of a group of 15 who were really struggling to participate because of how bright the lights were now more able to join in. Georgia was a hero in November and December of last year. She transcribed each of these 3-hour-long focus groups. And then she did the really important piece of work of extracting anonymized quotes. And you can see one of these quotes on the right-hand side here. It says, when you integrate sensory adjustments into the environment, you make people's lives easier, and they can keep certain sensitive information about their condition to themselves. And that empowers them in a really big way. So rather than leaving the burden on somebody to disclose that they have additional needs, just design the space from the beginning so that they don't have to make that disclosure. We circulated these, I think, 60 pages of anonymized quotes over 3 different documents for the 3 focus groups for review. And everybody in the focus groups had the opportunity to review those, to let us know if the anonymization was not good enough. So they may be able to identify themselves in the documents, these summary documents of the review that they were reviewing, but they can consent to sharing that. But we gave them that opportunity, and we made sure that they understood that the information was going to be made totally public. And then we published those under a CC BY license. And all of that information is available at this link in our GitHub repository down at the bottom. And we really, really hope that others use that information. That's one of our major deliverables of the project, is that we have gone through, Georgia in particular, hours and hours, days of work to solicit and sort of summarize all of these people's experiences. And we really want to make sure that others can build off of that work as well. And I just want to highlight in the top, let me just flip back so you can see it. At the beginning of this quote on the right-hand side, there are letters A, P, and G. And this came from a key that was developed by a member of the facilities team at the Turing. His name is Otis, and he's autistic. And it gives important context to the quote. So we've anonymized the quotes, which means that we don't have the person's name or any identifying information next to them. But it's really important for prioritizing the project to know whether people came, whether they were members of Autistica, the organization, the Turing Institute, or the Fujitsu developer team, whether they had a specialist role on a project, if they were a researcher particularly, what their connection to autism was. So if they were autistic or a parent of someone autistic, and just to be very clear, you can be both autistic and a parent of someone who's autistic, as the person in the previous slide was. And then actually one of the big sort of suggestions that we incorporated from Otis was this connection to experience. So whether the person was talking about a direct experience or suggestion or opinion, whether it was an indirect connection, or whether they witnessed somebody else talking about it, or whether it was just a general comment. And that's because in the sort of history of autism research, there has been quite a sort of divide, and I hope we're doing something to kind of mend that divide, around the perspectives of autistic adults and parents and carers of autistic children, and making sure that we are maintaining the context of who came up with this priority to be able to sort of generalize whether it is actually on behalf of or from an autistic person themselves, or if it's from somebody else who knows those people. So that's a key that took a lot of work, and I really appreciate Otis's deep thought and sort of interactions and conversations with Georgia as they were developing this. Back to our values. We are committed to communicating our aims, priorities, and ongoing progress as the project evolves. We want to have as much active engagement as possible, and we have regular newsletters, and I would love for you all to please subscribe to our newsletter. It'd be great to have more people hearing about our updates as they come out. And last week, we sent out our April newsletter. That's Otis on the right-hand side there, in St. Pancras Station, where I would have been traveling to Paris to come and see you all. We shared a video that the Fujitsu developer team have made demonstrating some of our first pass of the wireframe work. We shared some project news. We shared a quote and links to the summaries. We wrote a blog for Autism Awareness Day, and so we shared that. We have some more upcoming opportunities, and we also wanted to offer some social connections during the pandemic, and so we've asked if there's any member of our community that would like to get in touch and have a tea or coffee over Zoom, or if there's a way that they would most like to sort of feel connected to the project. As many of you will be thinking, it's really important to have appropriate data protection and informed consent on our project. As I said earlier, I'm very interested in thinking about whether data and information can be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, but not open. And we want to maintain the highest standards of data protection. Now, this term fine-grained consent, actively maintained, there's a lot in those, 5 words written in that one bullet point. If you think about signing terms and conditions on when you sign up for Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, any type of blog, you usually are shown a bunch of information, you're asked to check a box, and that gives, you've sort of signed away your consent for information on that you're adding to that platform. It might be used, it might be shared in a way that your friends and family can see, which is exactly the purpose that you intended, but it's also going to be used for machine learning analyses to target ads at you. It's also going to be used to sort of link up and create other networks that you may not know is happening when you consent to sharing your information on that platform. And so part of our commitment to transparency is actually a commitment to having people really know what they are consenting to when they consent to being part of the platform. And the actively maintained aspect is we want people to be able to change their mind. So it's not the case that you have to just be all in at the beginning or delete your profile and remove it all. You can actually have, for example, a very stressful experience that you share in great detail whilst you're in a sort of quite a heightened emotive state. And you might the next day say, do you know what, that's actually a little bit too personal. I don't need that to be shared. I did consent yesterday to sharing it, but I've changed my mind. And we want to build a platform that allows people to have that fine-grained control. They can control whether others can see it. They can control whether it's used for research or neither, in which case they can use it just as their own platform for reflecting on their experiences. So this is where Open Humans comes in, and this is where the work that Bastian Mad Prime have been leading. Essentially, all of the things that I just described are exactly what the Open Humans platform and infrastructure provides. So we are really delighted to be able to link in to a project that is giving people back access to their own data and educating them about the potential of their own data. I said at the beginning that I'm super into open source. We partner with Open Humans, which is open and makes all of their infrastructure publicly available and under a reusable open source license. And we also, our partners at Fujitsu are committing to working openly on GitHub from the very beginning, and for making all of the platform that they're developing for us open, which will be the front end of that website, totally open as well. I've already sort of labored this point about the fact that process documentation and the design research is a major deliverable for the project. So the openness of insights from the community is actually something that we really want others to be able to build off of for totally different purposes than a citizen science platform. And everything is publicly available for reuse under a permissive open license. We choose either MIT license for software or CC BY for data and insights. And I dream of a developer community that includes data scientists, industry experts, and our autistic collaborators. And I have the simplest and most obvious Venn diagram here that just basically highlights the fact that obviously you can be autistic and an open source developer. And I would love for those people to be part of designing and building this platform. I guess I have like a little sort of dream of finding people who really enjoy web development or software development in any way, and giving them an opportunity to use those skills for a project that is beneficial to hopefully themselves or their families. This is, I would say, a somewhat over the top and detailed diagram. And I'm not going to go into a massive amount of detail on it in this presentation, but I wanted to include it for all of you because I know I'm speaking with active researchers and people who are thinking about an awful lot of these same points that I'm bringing up. And one of the things that we sort of slightly struggled with in shaping our collaboration with the developer team at Fujitsu is that they work under an agile Scrum process. And Scrum works really well if everybody is there at the same time. So it's very time bounded. And essentially what where we've got the inside loop here of continual, that's our sort of the more traditional Scrum process, which happens over a sprint, maybe 2, maybe 3 weeks long. And there are these sort of stand-up meetings in the morning. There are specific Scrum ceremonies that happen. And they are fantastic for moving quickly, for integrating information from the retrospective, for being able to adapt to changing needs. But that type of time-locked process is not great when you are asking volunteers to come along and give their time. So if you imagine the great diversity of members of the autistic community, you may have somebody who has a full-time job and can only contribute on evenings and weekends. You might have somebody who goes to school and so can do an awful lot maybe in the holidays during the day, but not necessarily can't commit to every 3 weeks being able to participate. You might have somebody who is a stay-at-home parent, and they actually do have time during the day, but they're obviously looking after their kids in the evenings and weekends. And so we wanted to be able to allow people to take part as best as we can without locking them into missing opportunities around the sort of more fixed and rapid way of working that Agile allows. And so one of the things that we have, and if you sign up to our mailing list, you will be able to get access to it, although you could also hang out on the GitHub and read all the notifications if you wanted to too, is that we don't do a traditional retrospective and demo. We actually publish a sprint report and a video, and we allow people to review that and give feedback on that as they see fit, like at a time that is most suitable for them. So there's lots of information about that if anyone's interested in trying to build off of it or contribute to it at that agile-open source-workflow document. Our last value is diversity and inclusion. I think I've made this point unbelievably strongly on essentially every single slide of this presentation, that our goal is to welcome all perspectives, to remove barriers to participation, to nurture a respectful and accepting community, and to have an enforceable code of conduct with appropriate safeguarding pathways. And actually, one of the things that's interesting about the code of conduct and the safeguarding is an interesting question about whether people can consent to sharing their information, and how we moderate information that is shared with the platform or that is shared with us to help build the platform, and how we're able to sort of take responsibilities around vulnerable people, which some autistic people with complex needs may be legally classed as, but many will just be able to share their experiences, and we don't want to be sort of limiting them based on their diagnosis. And all of that documentation, all of our ethics review documentation and data management is also in our GitHub repository for you to see. So that's the end. This is the goal. Let's work together to ensure autistic people live longer, happier, and healthier lives. And these are the links. It'd be wonderful to have you join us, to have you input, to have you build off any of the work that we're doing. And thank you so, so much for all of you for joining and listening along. And thank you to all of our participants. I'll stop there. And if anyone has any questions, I guess, Bastien, maybe you can moderate them.
Yeah, and I see that Caroline already put in a couple of questions in the chat. I don't know whether you want to rephrase them verbally as well, Caroline?
Hi, Christy.
Yeah.
Okay, my first question was about the 10 priorities. Who did decide that this was the priorities, and how did they build the list?
So the link at the bottom of the slide has lots of details about that. It was this collaborative process over, like I said, over about 18 months of running focus groups with lots of different members of the autistic community, bringing together clinicians, bringing together carers, social care workers, and research experts in autism, having sort of quite a lot of those individual meetings. I think they also had, as part of it, like an open web form that anybody could type into. And then, as you imagine, there were quite a few cycles of sort of iterating and refining that list and bringing it down. But that's what the James Lind Alliance, which is a charity based in the UK, that's what that process, that sort of inclusive and iterative process around co-creating an output, that's exactly what they specialize in. So the link at the bottom will give you lots of details about how it works. But essentially it was like this long sort of collaborative process of including a diverse range of expertise from the very start.
You're still muted, Caroline.
The second question was about your two questions initially that you presented at the beginning. They are really open questions. I mean, you can put a lot of information on it. And how do you analyze that? Do you have specific way to analyze these responses, or?
So we are totally open to collaborators to come along and help us with that. There will be, there's actually two angles on this sort of openness. So one thing is that the openness of the question is actually quite difficult for autistic people. Asking really, this is one of the things that I have learned about myself, is that I am very, very comfortable with extremely open-ended questions, and members of our focus groups generally just push back very strongly on me and be like, what do you mean? What do you want us to say? And so part of our design process is actually kind of clarifying the openness of those questions and trying to think about whether a more structured way of inputting information would be more accessible for autistic community members. So that's one thing that we are currently working on and sort of iteratively designing with our collaborators and anyone else who wants to come along and join in. In terms of analyzing the data, the most important thing is actually being able to sort of show the richness of the experience. So we very purposefully haven't sort of reduced the experiences down into kind of maybe a more traditional questionnaire or Likert scale or something like that. Hopefully, what we hope is that we'll be able to build some sort of natural language processing, something like a recommender that would be able to say, this response and this response look like they're quite similar. And the purpose behind that would be that if somebody is entering an experience, in the long term, the vision that we have, what we would love is for a little sort of pop-up to happen on the website that says, oh, your experience looked kind of similar to this person's experience, and they have some advice on how you can kind of work around it, or sort of suggestions, maybe it's how to have a conversation with your boss around needing quieter space or a fixed desk in a hot desking environment. And so we would really like to try and build that recommender that links up these two together. And then we'll also hopefully be able to use natural language processing to sort of pull out common themes that people are coming at. We're quite a long way, I think, from that. Like, you can imagine we're going to need like a lot of data to be able to sort of link up those responses. So our main priority at the moment is making sure that the platform is designed to be accessible for people to use, because if they can't use it, we'll never get to that scale of information.
Okay, and the last one was about how many people do you have in focus groups? In one focus group, how many people?
In the focus groups, we have between 12 and 15 people.
Okay.
And we try and have a mixture of parents, autistic people, and we have quite a few autistic parents of autistic children. And then we also have in those focus groups, like you could see from the key, there will usually be at least one of Georgia and me from the Turing Institute. So being able there to sort of drive, and we set the agenda and kind of ask quite a lot of the questions. We've had members of the Fujitsu community there, and including like software developers for Fujitsu who are autistic or who have children who are autistic. And so we sort of include a lot of the richness of their experiences.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, Ignacio, I see you want to ask a question.
Yes, thank you very much for this super exciting presentation. It's really impressive, and I will go and see in the GitHub all the documentation for all the things I am struggling up now. I had a question concerning, well, you talked a little bit just when answering to Caroline about the themes. So you collect experiences following a really open question. Do focus groups analyze responses that appear in a common theme, or do they analyze end responses for end random responses? What are the responses that are analyzed? How many responses are analyzed by a focus group? And also, how many responses to this questionnaire do you have now?
We have zero. We have zero responses right now because we are currently in the design phase. And so we don't have ethics approval for collecting the data. And what the sort of way that we're thinking about it is that we have to do the design phase first in order to be able to write down and commit to the appropriate ethics review boards what we're going to do. You can sort of imagine that a university ethics review board is going to be like, what are you going to do? When you say, oh, I don't know, we're going to do all these kind of cool and interesting things. We'll see what we'll do. And you can imagine that doesn't go down super, super well. So we have ethics approval to engage with our focus groups, for example, to like record the sessions with them, to these processes around kind of how we're going to get their consent for what we make public, things like that. But we're going to do another big ethics review once we have the sort of platform designed in a sort of pretty sensible way, sensible according to our collaborative members, our community members. And then we'll start collecting information. So we're not going to start collecting information, I would imagine, before, like, I feel like the fall will be the earliest. It's quite likely to be a little bit later on. One question though that I can answer, which maybe underlies some of the question that you were asking, was around, we're thinking quite a lot about moderating the information that comes in. So when somebody puts an experience into the website, what are the criteria against which we would say this is okay to make public, or this is okay to be used as part of research, right? So we could all imagine, and we're not, I think we've not been like abusively Zoom bombed today, but you could imagine there's like people on the internet who are a little bit rubbish. And so it would be highly possible for people to fill in either garbage, which would not be that problematic, you could just delete it. But a much more problematic space would be a friend describing an autistic person that they knew, but in a way that was quite dehumanizing and offensive to the autistic person. So the autistic person maybe has a meltdown, they are in sensory overload, they have a really difficult time, and their friend goes ahead and writes a whole bunch of stuff without their consent about them into this platform. And one of the things that we're thinking about with our moderator process is who gets to say whether that information is acceptable or not, whether that information is useful or not. And so we don't have answers to that, but that's absolutely something that's kind of part of the workflow process that we have to think about, is who it'll be autistic people essentially, but like what training do they need? How are they going to need to rotate around? What support are they going to need to be able to sort of moderate that information as it comes in?
Thanks. Anyone else having questions? I see there's one in the chat. Do you want to reach from there? Joel, do you want to?
Hi. Well, maybe. Yeah. So thanks very much for the talk, and I discovered a lot of things, and I was very pleased to attend and to hear what you were mentioning. So I noticed that you were very much referring to how other people in the world, and I saw things like adapting the world, sensory adjustment, and you also mentioned implicitly space and movement analysis, adaptation to that. And my experience here in Paris is that these points are pretty much touched by the people in design and architecture. And they're also even doing research, I think, that are also connected to disability. So my question was, do you have any kind of collaborations or a contact or discussion with these guys? Very closely related, for example, to what we do here in Paris with my students here. So thank you.
Well, then we should definitely connect with you for this, and it'd be wonderful to stay in touch. We have, at the Turing Institute, one of the major research programs is in urban analytics. And so that is monitoring the built environment and how people move around it. And so the most recent talk that I gave about this project was actually to the urban analytics community, to hopefully try and build in some connections there. I think the stage that we're at the moment is that because we're mostly focusing on how to get the information in, I think my answer is somewhat similar to the previous questions, that we're absolutely thinking about those connections and we're thinking about building the relationships, but it's going to be a little ways off before we can actually tell people information that's helpful to them. the one thing, but essentially, yes, absolutely. Everything that you say around sort of who can make the decisions, like the architects, the designers, both interior and exterior, how can we sort of link up with those people? And one of our contacts that we have who reached out to us is from the London Fire Brigade. And they were thinking about fire safety as being, and how to make sort of fire safety trainings or sort of information accessible for autistic people. You can, I guess, kind of imagine that if you have sensory processing, if you have heightened sensory processing and you're very sensitive to noise, a fire alarm going off is going to be very, very stressful, and actually could potentially be extremely dangerous, right? If it sort of locks someone down and makes it very difficult for them to function. Yeah. So it's beautiful. I'm sort of deeply, I'm just very, very grateful that this collaborator from the London Fire Brigade had got in touch with us, having heard about the project from Autistica, to say, we're just really keen to know. We're really keen to know what the autistic community need from us so that we can provide that training in a way that's most useful for them. And the last thing that I'll say on that point is that the National Health Service in the UK, before coronavirus, had set accessibility for autistic people as one of their highest priorities. So making sure that hospitals and doctors' waiting rooms were spaces that were sort of welcoming for autistic people, parents of autistic children, rather than the information that we've received from our focus group members, which is that they are actually sort of some level of hellscape and very noisy and very overwhelming for a lot of people. So that's another connection that we absolutely have through Autistica to hopefully have sort of some good influence.
Okay, so maybe we'll have a nice discussion in future. Then together with Anirudh, maybe it would be very nice to have this discussion about this. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Yeah. And thanks again for the talk. Yeah. Very inspiring, very interesting.
Thanks. Anyone else who wants to ask their question? Feel free to just unmute and go ahead.
Can I show a form that we have on our website? Can I try and navigate to it? It's a nice little action to hopefully lead people on. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to go to Autistica, Turing Citizen Science, which is the GitHub repository. Seems to be who was taking screenshots or something. So let's zoom this in a little bit more. And to get involved, these are the lists of ways of getting involved. If you are comfortable with GitHub, you are absolutely welcome to explore GitHub and read all of our documentation. But we do have this little warning here that GitHub can be a little confusing. You're also very welcome to help us tidy up our GitHub and make it less confusing, but that's obviously quite a lot of work. So I want to just quickly show you this Google form. The Google form, let me zoom in again, sorry, says this form is used to collect anonymous feedback. There are 3 questions. What information would you like us to know? Do you have a personal connection to autism? And can we use the information that you've provided to inform how we design and build the platform? And so it then asks twice. It says, I understand that the information I provide will be made publicly available. And then this box, you can just write around up to about 300 words, or you can just write it. You could put a couple of links in there. You can tell us your personal connection to autism, and you have to consent again to make the information public. But that information gets archived in our GitHub repository, and it becomes part of those resources that we're building to sort of include and share and summarize all of the information that's going on. So if, as you're watching this presentation, there are references, connections, other projects that you think that we should be linking up to, that would be a spectacular place to go and put that information, because then we have it and we have your consent to publicly archive it on our GitHub repository. There's your, that and join the mailing list. There's your take home action.
That's great, thanks. So maybe I have a question, which is like, what's the next step to get to the platform? So you said you are in the ongoing process and you think maybe in fall, maybe a bit later, you will have like a version online. So what's the next step to get there?
The massive piece of work that's ongoing right now with Fujitsu is wireframing. So we are just, and there's the guy, Chris, he's a designer at Fujitsu, who's doing, just leading on that work, and being able to do user experience research, so the user testing on that wireframe to make sure that we don't go sort of wildly down a technological solution in terms of building a website that is not in fact navigable. I'm not 100% sure if that's a word, that is too difficult to navigate for autistic people. He's leading on that wireframing. We have connections to people who are in the focus groups, making sure that we are testing with them and learning from their experiences. And the other piece of work that's ongoing right now is taking all of those summaries, all of those quotes that Georgia identified, and potentially turning those into what in Agile and Scrum are called user stories. And they are issues on GitHub that can then be addressed. So we will make sure that the wireframes and then obviously the end platform addresses each of those requirements if they are actionable, if they make sense. So that's the big piece of work at the moment. I think where we are desperately in need of additional help is, and so you can sort of connect us to anyone that you know of, is actually around writing the copy. So writing the words to go on the website and the wireframe. I have, as I was saying earlier, I'm both very comfortable with big open-ended questions, which sits quite, is quite inaccessible for some of the autistic people that we collaborate with. But also I write quite long and detailed descriptions, and that's also quite inaccessible for some autistic people. It can be quite overwhelming to look at a big wall of text. And so that's our sort of, we've got the wireframing sort of ongoing and in hand, but the next thing I think is making sure that we communicate on the website as clearly as we can. And, you know, folks have already sort of identified in the questions today that one great big open-ended question is maybe free, but probably a little too free. It's probably a little sort of overwhelming. So thinking about how we can construct those.
Great, thanks. Anyone else who has a question for Kirsty?
I just would like to know, Christy, if you would like to have some time for showing. I can show you what I've been doing now with teachers in a quite similar method and quite complementary, I would say, in some elements. And I would really like to show you what I've been doing.
Thanks so much. So this is obviously the sad thing about me not being in Paris for a couple of days and being able to sort of swing over to go out for lunch or something and be able to hear more about what you're all working on. I have a meeting at 12 o'clock today, which is in 25 minutes. So I absolutely have time right at the end of this, whenever we finish. That's up to you, Bastian. But yeah, I can totally stay on the call and I would love to hear more.
Ignacio, you can just go ahead. I mean, those who want to stay and are curious will just stay, because if it's just a normal seminar, and those that want to leave will have to leave. That's fine, but you can sort of share your screen, and those who want will just stay around.
Yeah, well, I will have a little time because I think lunch is soon to be ready, but I will go ahead. Thanks. So
We can also just arrange another time, right? If you want,
yeah.
if you want to just send me, we can ping me an email and we can find a time, because it would be nice if Georgia was also able to hear what you're doing. Georgia's the postdoc who's basically doing all of the work. And so if you have lunch that's coming up now, then maybe we can just find another time this week and we can jump on.
Hi, Christy. I'm Marion, and I would love to join to this conversation as well, because we are mainly working on this collaboration between design and science. I'm the doctoral student of Joël. So if you have time, like anytime like this week, and with Ignacio, maybe we can share this, because I think we have a lot of things to share in terms of qualitative research. You talk about focus group, and this is also the things that we are trying to put in place for the baby lab of the CRI. So if you are interested in it, we can organize something, maybe share a mail. And Ignacio, would it be okay for you as well? Perfect.
Yep, I sent an email to all of us. I think Bastian would be nice if you are there too.
Of course.
Sure.
Great.
That'd be great. Yeah, I have like a big old deadline on Wednesday, so I might say like Thursday or Friday of this week, if that's okay.
Okay.
That's perfect.
It'd be really, really nice. Yeah, I would be delighted to hear about the work. Yeah, absolutely. And maybe if anyone else I know everyone's heading out, so thank you so much for being here and have a lovely afternoon. If there's anyone else who wants to join and be part of that, there's no limits on from my end. So just
those who want to join, drop an email to me, and I will organize it.
Thanks for doing that, Ignacio.
Thank you so much, Christy. Bye.
Beautiful. Thank you. Look forward to it. That'd be great.
Yeah, thanks everyone who came, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Awesome.
Let me stop the recording.